All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are excited to host this webinar. We have some really lovely guests with us. So this is the How We Document webinar. This is our third webinar in our 2023 How We Document webinar series. This one is on scaling design systems and specifically growing your team. All right, so before we start, a couple housekeeping things. You can download the How We Document report from zeroheight.com, How We Document with hyphens in between. You can also scan the QR code to get the actual report if you haven't seen it yet. And then we have a Zero Height Slack community called Zeros. You can join that as well. You can join the webinars channel to ask questions if you'd like, especially like afterwards in the webinar. If you need assistance, you can message Connie Greasley or Jules Mahe. They will be happy to assist you. I unfortunately will be unavailable to moderate the chat and what's going on, so definitely reach out to them. And then we are recording this webinar. You will get a link to the recording a few days afterwards, so we'll send that out. And then lastly, be kind, don't be a jerk. We don't have a problem throwing you out, but everyone's been very well behaved so far, so thanks for that. Okay. All right. So upcoming events, we have another webinar next Wednesday. This is a little different. This is based on Amplify series that I run, highlighting different underrepresented communities in the design system space. So for this webinar, we are going to do a Wikipedia edit-a-thon for women in tech. So in celebration of Women's History Month, and you'll get a chance to learn how to edit Wikipedia. And this is also what I realized is that only 19% of biographies in Wikipedia are of women. So there are a lot of biographies missing, a lot of information about women missing in Wikipedia. And it's also really important because to make sure we're filling in those gaps because Wikipedia informs so many of our devices. So like Google search results are informed by Wikipedia, as well as AI is trained through information on Wikipedia. So I learned that a bunch of awesome UX designers, engineers, and data science people who've all written books don't have Wikipedia pages. So you can sign up for that. That's next week. If you check out our blog, we have the information there. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Deanna Thompson, who is a UX design manager for the design language system at Nordstrom, and Tree Persaud, who is a user experience lead for the design system at ZS. And I am Michelle Chin, a design advocate at Zero Height. So we will jump into asking questions. But before that, I wanted to set a little bit of context on this topic in particular. So while doing the How We Document survey and kind of analyzing the data that we were getting and writing the report, we learned that a lot of teams were, a lot of design systems had design system teams first and foremost, which is really great. And a lot of them were growing them. So the bigger the team size was, or the bigger the company organization size, the bigger their design team has a tendency to be. We also noticed that the older that the team design system was, the bigger the team was starting to get. We also noticed there was like several different roles involved with teams, even at the smaller level. A lot of people had project managers or content writers, even at a small size. So we thought it would be a really great topic and it would be really nice to have some experts along to talk about their experiences of growing a design system team. So I'd like to kick it off with a little background question. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with design system teams and building them? Either Deanna or Tree, if you'd like to take it.
Tree, you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So yeah, my experience with design system teams essentially started out as being a design system designer myself. I was person number one on a couple of teams back, and just from that experience of being person number one and having that team grow into like a asynchronous sort of distributed team was a big learning experience for me. And then, sorry, there was a second part to your question I forgot already.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So, like, just in terms of like building design system teams, like what your experience is like.
Yeah, and I think that honestly, like a lot of a lot of the building comes into skill set matchmaking in a sense. Sometimes I feel like a matchmaker when I think about what kind of skill sets we have on the team and like kind of thinking about what kind of gaps we want to fill for. So I would say that, you know, a lot of it is 60-40 in terms of skill sets that are specific towards UX design, but also understanding like communication skills and understanding how people work together or work in a sense like in a distributed environment. That's been a big thing on our team just because our team's engineering team is offshore. So yeah, pass it to you, Deanna.
Okay, yeah.
My journey with design systems started when I worked at Amazon. I was designing experiences for like the customer facing e-commerce site. And as an IC designer at the time, I used Amazon's kind of like customer facing design system that they had. It was pretty robust. I remember it was like easy to use with lots of design and like engineering resources and documentation. And I remember having so much respect, you know, appreciation and empathy for the team that used to run it, the design system. Like every time they wanted to change or redesign a component, they would consult the like design system design community, UX design community at Amazon, which at the time I think was like hundreds of people. And I remember, you know, they would kind of temperature check the changes that they wanted to make or introduce to the system via this UX design kind of email alias distribution list. And hundreds of designers would respond with all kinds of opinions, like I hate this new component or this change you're making. Or, I love it, or you know, you need to consider XYZ use case. And I thought to myself, wow, this is such a hard job, but brings so much value to so many people. And then when I moved to Nordstrom, I started as a designer, also as an individual contributor. But then I ended up on a different side of the spectrum, on the opposite side of the spectrum. I was a little frustrated by the, you know, lack of documentation and resources on the design system side, and there was no like dedicated design system team whose focus was to make engineer and design jobs easier and enable the team to kind of focus on high value tasks and minimize low value tasks. And so I volunteered to establish and kind of run the practice of design system at Nordstrom, and essentially growing the team from 0 people to what I think right now is 14 people who support design system full time. That's my experience.
Oh, wow. That's really exciting. Very cool. And that leads into, I guess, like our first question. At what point do you know you need to grow your team?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. And I think knowing when to grow the team is very important decision for a manager or whoever is, you know, running and supporting the design system. And I think it can affect the success of the design system. So I believe there are a few, you know, kind of like indicators that you could use to decide if it's time to consider expanding the team. So first one is increased workload. If the team is kind of struggling to keep up with the workload required to maintain and develop the system, it might be time to consider bringing in additional people. And then if the scope is increasing, so, you know, for example, if your organization is expanding its products or services, maybe your org is investing in like building a new internal tool, and then a design system will need to grow and evolve to meet that need, to support that internal tool. So this might require additional members to help kind of develop and expand the system. Another one I would say, you know, if you have skill gaps on the team, skills or expertise required to build and maintain the system, maybe it's something or somebody who focuses strictly on accessibility, or someone with strong kind of content strategy, content design, language design skills. And the last one, I think, strategic company priorities. You know, maybe the design system is that strategic priority for the organization, or maybe there is a new strategic like initiative that requires the design system to be kind of an enabler of that initiative. For example, your company is rebranding, you know, it might be assigned to invest in additional team members.
Okay, yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense, and I think that that's really good. Kind of like that you pointed out the four aspects that people can kind of use as a takeaway to build their case for asking for additional headcount. And Tree, likewise, like into your experience, like what point do you know you need to grow the team?
Yeah, I think Deanna pretty much hit it on the head. I think that a big thing that we recently experienced in wanting to expand the team is that we realized that the domain expertise that existed on the team, there was like a bit of a gap for the things that we were going to take on in 2023 roadmap, or we're taking on now. So a big part of that was thinking about scaling with those specific skill sets in mind, and really becoming partners with our hiring folks and understanding how to test for those things and how to properly gauge the level of expertise for the most domains. And I know I'm being kind of like vague, but so the idea of like, is someone a content writer? Is someone a UX writer? Do they have technical writing experience? And these type of things come up with writing documentation. And sometimes we experience things where not native speakers might be reading the documentation we have. So how do we accommodate for that? How do we accommodate for translations of the documentation as well? And yeah, I didn't think I had too much more to add to what you said, Deanna. I thought what you said was like very thorough.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think it's kind of like you touched on this next question that I'm going to ask when you had mentioned about like skill set wise and kind of finding the gaps and also complementary skill sets. Like when it comes to scaling your team beyond designers and developers, like what roles should people consider including in that? And is there a natural progression for like, I guess, sequencing or adding these roles to your team?
Yeah, so we were very lucky that when the team was first established, we already had dedicated PMs and a product owner for the design system. And then we had sort of like a couple of UI designers, not specifically with like design system backgrounds, but with like a great interest. And I think that great interest is a good place to start. A lot of that can be trained along the way. But in addition to those roles, things that we really needed was content strategists, thinking about accessibility specialists. We don't have a full-time accessibility specialist dedicated to our design system currently, but they have another vertical that they handle on our team. But we were very lucky to have them come in and do a top to bottom accessibility check on the current system and kind of like help us establish things going forward. I think what was very important for our team as we picked up 2023 roadmap was to kind of create the skill matrix and understand where the gaps were. And I talked about that a little bit before, but it's kind of fun to see like everyone's name out on a list and like see what the skills are. And it's not like a shameful thing. It's almost like, well, this person is heavily in the UI domain, but they're very interested in this. How do we get them there? And understanding that who is a natural writer, UX writer versus who needs to be like skilled up in that way. So that's been like a part of our process that we've taken on. And yeah, the gaps kind of just spell themselves out after that, after you establish the matrix. It kind of sounds fun saying that.
Okay.
I love the idea of a matrix. Yeah, I would say the first thing we did, aside from designers and developers, was adding content designer or content strategist or a UX writer, but we call that role content designer, to help us kind of ensure that the language used in the design system is consistent, clear, effective, and also to support content style guide that our teams rely on. We, language and brand is very important to us, to Nordstrom, and we have also two brands that we support, Nordstrom and Nordstrom Rack. So content strategy plays an important role. So that was the first discipline that we added. And then another role we added right away, or very soon after we had designers and developers, was product management, because the size of and complexity of kind of like our internal org structure, and to help ensure that the design system is aligned with the company kind of overall product strategy and goals. And I also would advocate for a UX researcher who can help you understand the needs of the system's users and ensure that the design system is optimized to meet those needs. We don't have a researcher dedicated to design system, but I really would love to have a UX researcher. And as well, as Tree mentioned, accessibility expert. We don't have an accessibility expert. We kind of act, the design system team acts as accessibility experts, but we're not, experts. Like, we don't have formal training, but it would be an incredibly valuable addition to the system team. And I think I would also advocate for a design program manager role. I think that could be also very valuable depending on your org. This role can kind of help ensure the design system developed and maintained in a consistent and coordinated way. And they can also help facilitate communication and collaboration between teams. We have lots of teams that focus on lots of different things, building products internal and for external customers. And I think in terms of natural progression for adding roles, gradually adding additional roles as the design system grows and becomes more kind of complex makes sense. Ultimately, I think the goal should be to build a diverse, multi-disciplinary team that can work together effectively to build and maintain successful design system and serve, its users' needs. And those needs, I think, are different depending on your organization and your organization's needs.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really great consideration, like thinking about how your design system team interacts with the broader organization and all those teams. And there's a lot of nuances there for sure. And I think the audience, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will flag them. We will be asking audience questions in the second half of this webinar. So if you have any, feel free to put them in the chat. But in the meantime, I wanted to ask you all, like, how has growing your team benefited the design system itself, the design org, and the engineering org in what they do?
Yeah, I think for us, we're able to kind of have specialized expertise like content design that I mentioned. This helped us optimize the design system for the needs of our consumers. In general, I think a larger team can facilitate better collaboration between designers, engineers, and other stakeholders like visual designers or creative designers on the brand side. And I think growing the team also created kind of greater efficiency. If the team is well structured, it can help improve efficiency across design and engineering orgs, and ensuring that best practices are followed and consistently as well. And I think it also growing the team allowed us to increase the capacity for kind of developing and maintaining the system, so that it can grow and evolve and improve more quickly.
Yeah, I found
Great,
that.
Sri, what's been your experience?
Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead. You're fine.
Getting ahead of myself. I found that expanding the team exposes us to new ideas and new culture adds. That's been a big thing for our team, just in terms of we kind of inherited a legacy design system of sorts. I kind of call it a pattern library, but design system. So in terms of inheriting that, it took a lot to kind of like create our own culture, but then have that, like, I guess in trickle its way out to the larger team that we service. And with that new culture add, a big part of the design system, I guess, culture that we're trying to create processes and governance around is creating methods for collaboration, for asynchronous alignment, quality assurance, things like that, just to name a few. And we kind of have our own testing ground within the design system team. And then slowly, as we trial and error, figure out what works best for us, we try to create adoption outside of the team and see how that can help with how teams interact with us. So we've gone ahead and kind of created a collaboration model and understanding how we work now and what works well. And of course, it's like an ongoing learning exercise in that sense. But as our product offering has grown, so has a team. So a design system in our team, we constantly try to prove this, that it's more than a tool, and it's more than a tool that documents the product, but it's also a method of enabling collaboration. And I find that we're very lucky in the sense that the engineering org that we collaborate with very often, they understand design systems and they really understand componentry in the sense of like how it's utilized from a UX perspective, but also from a product perspective, more than just building it, which I think is a unique thing that I've experienced in my past organizations. And I think that I kind of said this before, but like using our design system team as like a testing ground for methods and like the way that we approach problems and maybe even like whiteboarding sessions and retros. So I think that when we do things on our side, it's an easy way to show the team on the outside how these things have benefited us and how we've invested in them and how they might have gone good or bad. Sometimes there's bad lessons too, right? To say that like, you know, this didn't go well because of XYZ, but it's a good lesson for, you know, other folks who might want to take on similar challenges that we're taking on.
Yeah, great. Totally makes sense. All right, let's see. Um, I guess what are some workarounds that, and I think you kind of mentioned this also a little bit earlier, Deanna, like what are some workarounds when you can't scale the team how you'd like?
Yeah, that's a great question. What comes to mind is I think just rigorous prioritization is needed. Probably we'll have to say no to a lot of things. Prioritize the most critical aspects of the system so that they're addressed first, even if there's like you have limitations on the team size. And that's exactly what we did when we were smaller. We had to prioritize, and we did not launch and ship everything we wanted or everything that our community wanted. And collaborate with other teams, encourage contribution from other teams to grow design systems offerings. We're lucky because we have team members on the design side that are eager to contribute. We just can't build as many things, because we don't have as many developers to build all the things that designers would like to contribute. And I think just encourage team to reuse existing design patterns and elements where possible. And I would also encourage to kind of implement more efficient processes that enable you to have shorter feedback cycle, something that allows like faster decision making, which can allow the team to make progress faster.
Yeah, Tree, what's your experience been like?
Yeah, we kind of run on a quarterly release cycle for the type of updates and pushes that we have, and for any team that's platform servicing, that's very slow. So what we found, what's been pretty helpful is allowing teams to have child design systems of the parent design system, which is the one that we manage. And a big benefit in that is because we have good foresight into what's coming into our next quarter based on what they've created in the intermediary time. So we don't always take everything that they propose, but we do take the things that have the most cross-pollination or the things that come up the most, or if there's like a bug that comes up that multiple teams have reported. Something that we've been working on recently is localization and understanding how to accommodate language diversity. So and something that's good that came out of that, because that skill set was not specifically on my team, was that we started this program called rotations, which is basically if there's extra time or interest in other parts of the team that are not design system based, we'll like borrow someone's time for 25 to 50% of the quarter and then have them like kind of drive their team's child design system into production. And we'll support them on the delivery side, of course, but it just kind of feels nice to feel that we have this co-authorship that's just not specifically determinant on our availability, but also opening up the idea. And it's also like kind of like bragging rights, because you get co-authorship inside of the design system, and it just allows us to make a pathway for someone who has genuine interest in contributing, but we don't want to block them, especially if it's like a solution set that's can be utilized with more than one pod on our team. And then another thing that we've done in terms of workarounds is just having opportunities for cross training. A lot of the individuals on my team have very specific domain expertise, but as we wrap up sprints and stuff like that, we try to create like little we call them Spark Z sessions, and basically just having opportunities to cross pollinate. If someone is an expert in a specific domain that's coming up in the following quarter or like in the another term of the roadmap, we'll give them an opportunity and a platform to kind of like share how they approach problems and create like office hours to kind of like mitigate those kinds of things. And then last but not least, we outsource to external partners if tasks are just like really tedious and we just can't get through it. Shout out to external partners. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's really great that like I like the idea of rotation and having people like kind of like contribute and kind of sit in, which is like a fun way to mix things up and it's just like a nice creative way to um, make the most out of what you have without like, when you can't get the extra headcount or the capacity that you need. Definitely seen that in other teams as well, and people seem to like being able to like rotate in. And I think it's also really helpful in like building, advocacy for adopting the design system of like, oh, like I created this, like everyone should use it, like it's a good advocate for adoption for sure. Let's move on to some questions from the audience. We've got quite a bit. So I think this is for you, Deanna. So Emily asks, as your team has grown. Oh, wait, this is a different one. Jana asks, how did you manage competing priorities prior to adding a PM to your design system team?
Yeah, that's a great question. Essentially, I was acting as a PM, and we invited, we plan OKRs on a half yearly basis. And as a design system team, we needed to plan our OKRs for like that half. And what we did was actually we invited the community to plan with us. We had lots of different like kind of road mapping exercises, sessions, and asked for input from different stakeholders in terms to help us narrow down on what we will be building, what we'll be delivering for that particular half. And yeah, like I said, I was kind of playing the PM role at that time. And it took very rigorous prioritization. And I think it really helped when we invited stakeholders from other teams. It really helped because it allowed them to, develop empathy for and see, oh, wow, there's so much that's being asked from the design system team, but how can they possibly build everything with, only, 5 people? I think it really helped. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Yeah, I think a lot of times with smaller design system teams, people are wearing multiple hats and doing
Totally.
multiple responsibilities. So yeah, it can it can be a lot. I would have loved a design program manager on my design system org that I was running. But yeah, okay. So let me ask a tree this question. Emily asks, as your team has grown, how has your process also evolved? And what tool have you used to manage that process with roadmaps, backlogs, that type of thing?
Yeah, so that's a really good question and really relevant to where we are currently in our org. My time has kind of been divided to like alignment initiatives, but also maintenance of the design system. So with that and my time being so partitioned, the ability to work autonomously and asynchronously has become very important. So being able to document somewhere published the processes that we follow, what are the workflows that we follow, that's been really helpful. And also creating channels of communication, not just to the design system team, but to also to respective teams that might be asking like questions that relate to like new components or troubleshooting components, or am I using this component the right way? So we've set up communication broadcasting channels. We published documentation on how we do workflows. And then lastly, just kind of creating this like, I guess like ethos, this broadcast of an ethos that just explains like what our focus points are for the year, so people can kind of manage what kind of questions they have and how do we size them based on the time that we have. So we have a rational point system of like small, medium, and large ask. A small ask, something that's like a quick ask that can be answered like over chat or a quick one-on-one. A medium ask is something that's like might need like a little bit of like research done, cannot answer it right away. And then large is like a requirement for an embedded answer, might need to take like a day or two, might need to join your process a little bit to understand how to answer that question. And that's been really helpful also to kind of like free up my time a little bit and allow designers to be autonomous and more independent in the work that they do. And then in terms of managing the roadmap and the backlog, our team originally was not, when I joined the team, we were not on Jira and we were not one-to-one. I'm not one-to-one. We weren't a sprint ahead of our engineers. And what's really helped is kind of being 2 sprints ahead. So we are now 100% on Jira. We're tracking and sizing all of our initiatives and all of our bugs and backlog tickets and all that. So I think with that, being on the same process and being able to advocate for like an agile process has been really, really helpful. Just because maintaining the work and not really proving, but like for lack of a better word, proving the trajectory of what we're doing it's kind of not enough. People need to see the vision and people need to understand what's coming so that you can create that excitement and also inspire new innovations to happen for the design system. And I think while we have this storytelling opportunity and this exposure to kind of present it in Jira, now that we have stats and KPIs behind it, the team can kind of see like what we're growing into, but also they can have like an opportunity to create a dialogue of what they want us to grow into, what kind of support do they need going forward for any initiatives that are coming down the line.
That's great. That's really awesome. All right, we have another really good question from Dominique. So they say, we are creating a design system and my managers presume that once the general system is in place, we can scale down the design system team. But I feel like it's never finished and should always look to grow to serve as many teams as possible. How do I convince my managers of this?
That's a really good question. I think that, not to shade your manager at all, but I think that that question kind of comes from like a lack of knowledge on what the design system is or what a design system team can or could be doing. So I think that understanding your team's needs and maybe like creating pillars around that of support that you guys could like channel and own could be a good way to do that. Like for example, if you had like 5 people on your team, thinking about 5 pillars of principles that directly impact the team that you're servicing and making sure that those constant like levels of growth and education continue to flow through could be a good way to do that. Production wise, I think I don't really have a great answer for production wise. Maybe Deanna, you could take that one. But yeah, I'm gonna stop there.
I guess for me, I think there's a correlation between like business needs, customer needs, and how design system can enable those business needs and customer needs and strategic priorities. I don't think design system there's ever like a final goal destination. It's when we're done, we will stop doing design system because products evolve, people evolve, processes will need to evolve with it, customers evolve. So design system is just another product that also needs to evolve together with your brand, with the people you serve and the community that the design system serves. So I think maybe kind of explaining that to your manager in a compelling way. Just kind of making the point that design system is a product and it evolves just like any other products.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that reminded me of like when you mentioned brand, we had a webinar a couple weeks back around starting design systems, and we asked one of the panelists like what they would have done differently, and they had mentioned that they would have kind of encapsulated, like pitched the design system as like part of the greater company strategy in terms of like aligning the brand, like having it be a tool not just for designers and developers, but really for the entire organization to, align the brand, exemplify the brand and product. So I think maybe also, thinking about like the bigger picture of how the design system fits into the organization as a whole versus just as like an efficiency for designers and engineers is something to consider as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I love that point because it's true. UI design system is, it's an expression of your brand. It helps express the brand just in a digital form.
yes, exactly. And so to follow up a little bit, Lee asks a question. Do you have any thoughts on what should be protected if you're asked to scale back a design system team to the bare minimum?
I may not fully understand this question, but I'm assuming that it's if you want to like share it externally, perhaps like to a contractor or something like that. Um, so in terms of protecting your IP, we tend to pull back on anything that's more advanced and in the atomic scale past organisms. So anything that's like template foundations or utilities, we tend to not share that. Just because that's more like the internal workings of how things work and maybe even like um, rationale behind API considerations. Um, but in terms of atomic uh, molecules and organisms, there's really no problem in sharing that on our end, just because it's based on the larger UX world and it's nothing that's super proprietary. But you can also think about sharing like a style guide. If something's like that's like a good way to approach things, and probably more tied into like a public domain that would be the branding tied into your organization. And then maybe something like having like a small library that you want to share, maybe an approach to like tables or an approach to like data viz. I guess it would really depend on who you're sharing this information to and like why you might want to pull that information.
The way I understood that
All right.
question was more about like whom to protect, or like what roles. If you ask to scale down, right? If you ask to scale down the design system, like what roles to protect.
Oh, I
And
completely misunderstood that question.
maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but Michelle, is that right?
Yeah, I think it's about the roles themselves. Like
Ooh.
if you were to ask, if you were asked to shrink the team down, what would you like? What would be like the bare minimum? Like who, like what roles, I guess, should be preserved?
I would say it really depends on your organization. Like every organization is unique. You know, maybe your company is big on, you know, protecting the brand or making sure that, again, the brand is expressed in your UI in the best possible way. So I wouldn't remove, you know, UI designers or UX designers, people that are responsible for kind of translating brand guidelines into the UI aesthetics. It really depends on your organization. If maybe accessibility at that point in time is really important, and you have accessibility experts, you know, don't get rid of accessibility experts on your team.
For sure. Based on that tree, I don't know if you had anything to add in terms of like if you had to scale back your team, who to keep.
I guess that'd be a tough question for me to answer. I'm kind of glad that I misinterpreted it, but no, nothing to add there. I think that was pretty good, Deanna.
Yeah. Okay, so another question, when you scale, so going the opposite direction, when you scale up your team to handle the design system, do you think it will have a stable version when the product team just using it or is just using it and there are no changes again? If yes, then how do you manage your design system team? I think they will have less of a job compared to when building the design system. So when the design system is like in maintenance mode, um, per se, versus like starting from scratch.
That's a good question. I'm trying to make sure I fully understand it.
Me too.
Yeah. So I think that question really is if you have scaled up your design system team, is there kind of like at a point where it's so stable that you won't need like the size of team that you have? And I think you kind of touched on this a little bit already, or both of you have. You know, if because it just seems like maybe the design system team might not have nearly as much work as like, you know, people creating the features and stuff.
Right, yeah. Or maybe you have a very like incredible contribution model, and you know, team members from your partner teams are contributing to the design system, so the actual core design system team doesn't have to be so big because everyone else within the organization is contributing to it, which is, I think, something that like Spotify is doing or was doing at some point.
Yeah, I think more than just supporting the intake process, design system teams can also be consultants for how to use a system. So like proper use guidance, how do's and do nots. So I think that that's actually like a big part of what takes up our time currently, like servicing the team and thinking about a platform approach versus just like like a one single execution component approach. So we often quantify a question, even though it's a singular question. We kind of like quantify it into like, what would this look like if it rolled out into 7 different products that have to like look the same, or what would cross pollination look like, and what would like threading between the products look like inside the platform. So I think that more than just the code freeze aspect of um, yeah, I think that was the term that you described it. But like once we're like freezing on the design system, there's still like a lot of other initiatives that we support in that respect. And our design system is not just used by our own platform team. Companion apps also use our design system. So just and I don't know how much of this I need to get into, but just basically our design system services like a platform, and then companion apps that are more client facing and individual white label service also use our design system with their own themes. So we're also supporting that initiative in sense of like how do they use our system and how do they scale what we have to their specific use cases for strategic partners in that. So I would say we're about 60-40 in that, in terms of like 60% maintenance of a design system, but 40% definitely going to like consulting and like proper usage.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the other thing is like, you know, in the How We Document report that we did, most companies have design system teams between like 4 and 11 people. So it's not like as if they're scaling that they're continuing to add more and more people to the design system team. At some point, it does kind of level out depending on your org size. Um, but yeah, okay. So kind of mentioning kind of to Tree's point about you know, doing the advocacy and making sure people are using components uh, properly. We have an existential question from Rob. So he asks, you know, what is this community that the design system serves? Developers and designers generally get by on libraries that underpin the design system. So who exactly is the documentation layer for, and what purposes does it serve other than proving to the rest of the company that it exists?
Um, this actually happened recently to us. So we were talking about a date picker like on a Friday, and then for some reason like completely forgot about a functionality piece of a date picker. And we went back to the next meeting. We were like all just like contradicting each other on what we agreed to be like active states and all that kind of stuff. So it was interesting that that documentation was already in progress, and because we had some of those like notes from that, we were already starting to inject that into like component documentation. So I think like in lesser words, the component documentation often serves as like kind of like an agreement on how we think things should function, or how we've agreed that things should function. But not only that, but also thinking about innovation opportunities. So whatever's published is one version of our documentation, and things that we have like kind of like still in the oven is like our offline version of our documentation research. So I think that if you think about who it serves everyone, right? It's a reminder on how we build product going forward, understanding compatibility with products going forward, or even like a team that wants to utilize something or inject something into your platform. You can almost share that documentation with them so that they can do their own homework and understand like how they are approaching these problems, versus being like kind of like the bottleneck and like the I guess like the knowledge holder to everything. I think at some point when you achieve a certain level of design maturity in your system, you're no longer like the knowledge holder. You're almost like I was gonna say influencer, but then I kind of like bit my tongue there. You're almost like the advocate for the person who is looking to solve a problem, and without molding them too hard into a direction that you want them to go, they can kind of find their own solution with your advocacy and with your guidance. And the second part of the question, what part does it serve? Um, I mean, I think I kind of got to that too. Just kind of like being like almost like a treaty of understanding, like this is how it functions. This is the growth that we couldn't do because of tech limitations. And our documentation also has like a little bit of version control notes to it too. So like there was like a huge bug that happened. We actually publish it in our design system to kind of show like, oh, in case you notice this thing, it wasn't just you. The other teams also reported this, and now it's a patch fix and like whatever other versions coming up. So I think it's a good conversation piece to keep people honest, but then it's also like a good understanding to understand like where you came from as well.
Yeah, I would add +1 to that, and I would add that it's essentially your company's opinion or suggestion on how to build products. And depending on your company, we, for example, have different levels. Designers that are junior that might need more support than designers that are more senior and seasoned. Same with developers and engineers and content designers. People come from different backgrounds, and some people just join a company straight out of school and they need more support, and that documentation is incredibly helpful to them.
Yeah, I like especially a lot of companies use that documentation for like onboarding, and that helps get your designer engineer up to speed sooner than kind of figuring things out on their own in terms of like pecking around on the designs or code.
Self-service for
Great,
sure.
thanks for answering that. Yeah. Okay, so I think this comes from Alex, and I think this kind of maybe Tree can answer this. What is your experience on outsourcing design system tasks so the core team can focus and collect future requirements?
So, sorry, what was the first part of the question? What is my...
Yeah, so I think you kind of touched on this in terms of like, outsourcing contract work with external partners. So what is your experience on outsourcing the design system tasks so the core team can focus on collecting future requirements?
Yeah, sorry. I my audio had broke. I didn't hear the first part of the question, but I hear it now. I'm good. So the type of things that we tend to outsource are things that we already have a clear process on, and things that we've already started to track like KPIs on. So there's like a steady flow already going, and there's like a clear path of the definition of done. And we find that while previously a internal designer might have been taking lead on that, they still stay on as a stakeholder in managing that external help. So they create like points of contact with that potential contractor, and just making sure that the work that's coming out is to the standards that they've defined as a definition of done or quality of done. And things, getting more specific, things that we would do in that way is like if we've created like the Atoms version, the Atoms level of our UI kit, outsourcing something like the bigger pieces that would utilize those smaller foundational pieces properly, and creating onboarding with that and making sure that they're built correctly. So our internal designer would take on the task of onboarding the contractor, explaining how things should look, how they should be named in the system, and then letting them, get the magic rolling. And then another thing that we've outsourced also is we created templates around, so we have two types of documentation. We have approach documentation around how to drive the ethos of our team, like voice and tone, accessibility, and other things along those lines. And our team still very much drives that internally. But the part that we've also looked to kind of like gain outside help on is like documenting the new additions to the components that already exist. So there might be some new discoveries in terms of like accessibility or contrast needs. And then once we've had those kind of like templated sections already established in terms of like what kind of language to use, what kind of like research are we backing this up with, create a template and kind of hand it off to our contractors and just have them do that.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. All right. So let's see. I think we have time for a couple more questions. This one comes from Alexis. So they say, I read an article that that design system teams make a pipeline for component testing. Do you have a pipeline of your own? And if you do you have some approval criteria that you could share?
Well, go ahead, Tree. I think your design system is a lot more mature than others, and than ours, and you might have a better answer than me.
I was actually looking for the question in the comments so I could like reference it, but so the question's around testing your design system, right, Michelle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So very relevant to where we are right now. So we're doing a big push for April a big release for April, and we're actually in the process of testing on a global level. What does everything look like, and how does it fit together? So two types of testing that we're doing. We're doing content testing in terms of documentation, specifically for component documentation, not for ethos documentation. But how we're testing that is it's a little manual, just because we want to read everything ourselves and just make sure that the language that we're using is very unified, and it sounds like the tone of our product as well. So that part is manual, and the second part, the design quality assurance for the UI kit. We just decided that we don't want to test our own design kit just because it might be like a conflict of interest. So we decided to kind of like, we have a stewardship group that we just established for our design system, that one person from each product vertical comes and advocates for their product line down in the design system section. And we want to ask them to test it. So we're working on a criteria checklist right now, just to kind of have them to make sure that the way that we've built the UI kit, if it's configurable, if the variables are set up correctly, is it condensed? Is it too condensed? And we're still kind of like working on that right now. But the biggest benefit that we found in not testing it ourselves in that respect is because the people who are actually the users of this actual UI kit, that's the valuable feedback that we want. And just understanding that our approach to it from a systematic approach may not always be one-to-one with how the users might use it. So it's definitely a learning experience. I'll have to let you guys know how that goes, but it's a great question.
Yeah, please keep us updated on our Zeros Slack channel.
Yeah.
Definitely love to hear how that goes. And then I guess, Deanna, does your design system have any testing that it goes through?
Yes, it does. Similar to what Tree was saying, we, depending on what we're building, we can even kind of set up mini like usability studies with designers or developers when we're testing our UI kit or new components that are going into our UI kits. If it's big enough, we also, ask the community to, who wants to test it. And it's kind of on a volunteering basis. People volunteer and they test before we actually push it to the library to be available to everyone. And we also, our engineers set up UAT environments where, if it's something global, like a global change, typography or color, in those UAT environments, everyone is welcome to like test. But essentially at that point, it's already quality assurance and UATing, and we have processes for that too. But it's looking at, how would this look like in production, and what bugs do we introduce, if any, because there's so many different pages and products and features that these global changes can affect.
Just wanted to jump in there for a second. Staging sites are so important for design systems. Dan, I think you hit that on the head there. We learned a lot from not having a staging site at first, but definitely missed in that.
Yeah, definitely a good takeaway to have. I'm gonna pop in this little link for the upcoming webinar that we have, since we're wrapping up really quickly. But yeah, that's our next webinar next Wednesday if you would like to join and learn how to edit Wikipedia pages. But wanted to wrap things up. I think everything you said was super knowledgeable and super helpful in understanding scaling your design system in terms of growing it with people, and how to make use of workarounds when possible. I've definitely learned a lot. And I wanted to wrap up with a final question for both of you. What's one piece of advice that you can give the audience when growing their design system team, if you could only give one piece of advice?
Yeah, I would prioritize a strong, diverse team culture that values collaboration, communication, and just continuous learner. We have to be students of the system, and we don't always have the answers. As your team grows, fostering an environment that encourages open dialogue and mutual support and shared learning, that's my core right there.
Yeah, plus one to that, and I'd say that hiring, growing the team really depends on your organization's needs, and those needs are very unique to to your company. Do what's best for your company, for your team, for your customers. Yeah, and prioritize hiring, retaining people that are passionate about design systems. That would be my
Great.
advice.
Thank you both so much. Yeah, I love it. Thank you both so much for providing your insight and sharing your experiences. This is really great. And again, we are recording this webinar, so we will share the recording with everyone afterwards. But yeah, thank you so much. And thank you all online for joining and tuning in. So we appreciate it. And we'll talk to you all later.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, our pleasure.